Today at 6, some progress is made at the Climate Summit in Glasgow in the race to limit global warming. Stopping and reversing the destruction of forests by 2030 is approved by over 100 countries, including Brazil, where vast areas of the Amazon rainforest have been lost. And methane emissions, a major factor in global warming, are meant to be cut by a third by the end of the decade. But the overriding message is one of caution.
We must take care to guard against false hope and not to think in any way that the job is done, because it is not. There is still a very long way to go.
Much more is expected by campaigners outside the summit, with demands for the rapid phasing out of fossil fuels.
This week, we've been driving less and walking more, also using plant-based alternatives.
And we'll be talking to one family about the practical changes needed to play a part in the fight against climate change.
Also on the programme, 2 police officers plead guilty to taking and sharing photographs of the bodies of 2 sisters who were stabbed to death in a park in London. The Health Secretary admits the government is not on track to meet its target of recruiting 6,000 more GPs in England by 2024. And how smart are smart motorways? A report calls for their rollout to be halted until the government can prove they're safe.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, Tottenham have confirmed the former Chelsea and Inter Milan boss Antonio Conte is their new manager until the summer of 2023.
Good evening once again from the Global Climate Summit in Glasgow, where world leaders have reached agreement today on 2 major areas affecting the future of the planet. More than 100 countries, led by the US and the EU, have launched a far-reaching initiative to cut emissions of methane, a gas that's a major cause of global warming. And the pledge is to cut emissions by 30% by the end of the decade. And if that's achieved, it could play a big part in limiting the rise in global warming to 1.5 degrees. Earlier in the day, there was another significant pledge to stop and reverse the process of deforestation by the year 2030. The real breakthrough here is that Brazil, where vast areas of the Amazon rainforest have been cut down, is among the 100 countries backing the pledge. And there is a separate initiative to cut carbon emissions by boosting the use of clean technologies in industries such as steel, road transport and agriculture. As we've been saying, the summit in Glasgow is widely seen as the last big opportunity to tackle further climate change and its devastating consequences. Our political editor Laura Kuensberg has been following the day's events here.
When cultures clash, can they still agree? When there's so much difference, there can be dissent. There are so many faces here in Glasgow, so many facets of what could be done.
Mr. DiCaprio, are you pleased with what's happening this week?
Hollywood stars might campaign, but less developed countries may well complain. The United Nations fears there's not enough trust to bridge the gaps, but deals are being made. 100 leaders signed a promise to stop the destruction of forests in 9 years' time.
I'm confident we can do this. All we need to do is summon the will to do what we know is right and we know is necessary and know is within our capacity. Let's get to work. We can do this.
Even the leader of the free world could be hemmed in, though. President Biden struggling to push his green ambitions through at home. And Boris Johnson's attention was cast across as many foreign leaders as possible. They'll depart tonight, leaving instructions with their negotiators.
Let's go, come here.
Around 100 countries have already signed up to cut the potent greenhouse gas methane by nearly a third by the end of the decade. But away from the glitz of the main stage, down a quiet corridor in a tiny office, a sign of just how hard an overall agreement will be.
至少是200亿左右。
China's President Xi isn't here, but one of the most powerful people you've never heard of is in his place, China's climate negotiator, Xie Zhenhua.
My discussions with John Kerry and Alex Sharma were highly constructive. We found there were still huge gaps.
He criticised developed countries for not coming up with cash they'd promised to help the less wealthy go green, and warned focusing too much on limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, as Boris Johnson wants, could destroy the consensus.
I am cautiously optimistic in the sense that on the way to the G20 in Rome, I said to some of you on the plane that if this was a football match, then the current score would be 5-1 down in the match between humanity and climate change. And I think what you could say today, after 2 days of talks with around 120 world leaders, is that we've pulled back a goal, or perhaps even two. And I think we're going to be able to take this thing to extra time.
What or who is going to score the extra 2 or 3 goals you still need?
If there's one thing that starts to give me confidence, or optimism anyway, it's that we are starting to create, for the countries that find it most difficult to transition away from fossil fuels, we're starting to create those coalitions of support to help them to move on.
The first 48 hours here have been frantic, and today there's been a flurry of promises that should hypothetically make a difference. But it's now that the hard bargaining really starts. Remember, Boris Johnson wants a deal that keeps global warming within safe limits. But here in Glasgow right now, it's far too early to be sure if that's in reach.
There'll likely be clashes and arguments, different voices and different views. Boris Johnson can't be sure what will greet him in Glasgow when near the end of this vast summit he returns. Laura Kunzberg, BBC News, Glasgow.
Well, as we've heard, one of the significant deals approved today by more than 100 countries is a pledge to cut emissions of methane gas, which is a major contributor to global warming. And the plan is to cut emissions by a third, thereabouts, by 2030. Less encouraging is that 3 of the countries responsible for the highest level of emissions, Russia, China and India, are not part of this agreement. Our science correspondent Rebecca Morell has more details.
From emissions from cows to rubbish rotting in landfill sites and flares from oil and gas, methane is escaping into the atmosphere. But today, more than 100 countries agreed to cut the gas by 30% in a deal brokered by the United States and the EU.
We have to cut emissions fast. And methane is one of the gases we can cut fastest. Doing that will immediately slow down climate change.
Methane is an important greenhouse gas, making up about 20% of global emissions. It's extremely potent and has caused about 50% of current global warming. Cutting all methane by a third by 2030 would reduce global temperatures by about 0.3 degrees by 2040. Tackling methane from the oil and gas industry will be a priority. The easiest way to reduce emissions is to plug any leaks.
You can't see methane unless you use a special camera like this one. It's a colourless, odourless gas, but because it doesn't last for very long in the atmosphere, if you cut methane emissions now, you make a big difference fast. It's why reducing methane is seen as one of the easier climate fixes.
But there will be challenges. Agriculture, including rice production, is one of the biggest emitters of methane. Solving that will be much harder. The countries who've signed up to this deal account for about half of global methane emissions, but there are some notable absences, namely China, Russia and India, who haven't come on board.
To achieve this 30% global target, we will need them to step up too. But having more than 100 countries on board, including some of the largest emitters and covering the vast majority of globally traded natural gas is a very big deal.
Of methane being released all around our planet. Now, for the first time, there's a target to cut this greenhouse gas. At a conference trying to stop temperatures from rising above safe limits, this is a significant step for the world. Rebecca Morrell, BBC News, Glasgow.
Well, the first deal that was reached today was on stopping and reversing the process of deforestation by the end of the decade. Boris Johnson says that protecting the rainforests in particular is essential if global warming is to be limited to 1.5 degrees. Trees are vital to life on Earth and they absorb around a third of all carbon dioxide or CO2 emitted annually. But according to the United Nations, an estimated 28,000 square miles of forest are lost every year, and that's equivalent to 36 football pitches every minute. Brazil, where vast areas of the Amazon rainforest have been cut down, is among the countries now backing the new pledge. In recent years, the problem has been getting much worse. Over 4,000 square miles of Brazilian rainforest were destroyed in just 12 months. Our correspondent Ola Guerin has travelled to Brazil to see at first hand the threat to one of the world's great ecological treasures.
The Amazon dream, a forest haven combating climate change. But the reality can look like this. No more tree canopy, the land stripped bare for planting crops. We were shown how easy it is to plunder the Amazon. Just one man and a chainsaw. Campaigners say illegal loggers have a green light from President Jair Bolsonaro. They accuse him of carving up environmental protections and fueling climate change. Miguel isn't worried about the planet, he's worried about his family.
É pela minha sobrevivência, entendeu? Pela minha sobrevivência da minha mãe, entendeu? Que eu tenho minha família também, entendeu? Apesar de não ser casado, mas eu dependo disso.
His handiwork seen from above. Every tree that falls here releases carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere, contributing to global warming. By night, specialist police are on the lookout for crimes against the forest. Illegal logging is big business. There's a rainforest mafia. The timber can wind up in Europe or the US. This load is legal, but Sergeant Robertson Inocenzio de Souza says he's fighting a losing battle.
O crime é contínuo, né? A gente somos 8 no total em 2 viaturas para uma imensidão de florestas. Então, a nossa dificuldade continua aí e como eu falei anteriormente, né?
And about an hour's drive away, ritual destruction. Every year, vast areas are cleared by slashing and burning.
The heat is building now and there's ash falling in the air. No attempt has been made to hide this. It's at the side of a busy road. And when fires like this happen here, it's not the work of nature, it's the work of man. In the global fight against climate change, this is one more loss.
And here too, lost ground. More Wild West than wild Amazon. Cattle farming is driven by global demand for Brazilian beef and backed by President Bolsonaro. Renato Ramos is a second-generation rancher. He says the forest is a living, not a fairy tale.
Para nós que somos hoje, que vivem da pecuária, somos agricultores hoje, né, ninguém planta no asfalto e muito menos no ar, né? A gente precisa adquirir uma área que seja pequena ou grande para poder fazer um plantio ou então uma criação agropecuária, entendeu? A Amazônia não é só mata, e sim é uma área que está em desenvolvimento para culturas e criação de novos investimentos.
But we got a very different perspective from activist Neginha Bandeira. She spent her life defending the rainforest and its indigenous peoples, or trying to.
É que a sensação é como se tu fosse Dom Quixote e lutando contra moinhos de vento, sabe? É como se alguma coisa significativa para a Amazônia só pode acontecer se os grandes empresários, se os grandes produtores, se eles tiverem uma sanção por desmatamento. Quando o povo disser, eu não compro nada resultado de desmatamento, aí pode ter uma mudança.
This rich but fragile ecosystem is changing its colours. Deforestation means the rainforest in Brazil now emits more carbon than it stores. The message from here is a distress signal. Orla Guerin, BBC News, in the Amazon rainforest.
So let's keep Brazil and the Amazon in mind as we talk to our science correspondent Rebecca Morell, who's inside the conference centre. I think it's fair to say, Rebecca, there's a lot of scepticism around about countries like Brazil saying that they're in favour of this new target, but whose track record, let's face it, is not good.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the tough bit with these conferences is whether the promises actually live up to actions. But I mean, I think it is fair to say that both of these deals have given a boost at the start of the conference. I mean, deforestation is vitally important. Trees are supposed to suck up and store carbon. If you cut them down and burn them, they actually release it. And as you've just heard, some of the major forests around the world are now actually carbon emitters. What is significant is getting countries like Brazil, Indonesia and Canada on board. But we have had a promise back in 2014 that was exactly the same and nothing really happened. Methane is really interesting. It's only in the last few years that scientists have realised what a big contribution it's actually making towards climate change. And fixing some of the problem is actually straightforward, but it is going to be a challenge. Obviously, if you don't get some of these bigger countries on board, they're not going to solve the problems of climate change, but they are going to help to chip away at it.
OK, Rebecca, thanks very much once again for those thoughts. Rebecca Morell over in the summit just across the river from where we are. One other development today, Boris Johnson has formally apologised to the Israeli energy minister after she was unable to gain access to the conference in her wheelchair. Karina El-Harar, who has muscular dystrophy, was forced to return to her accommodation yesterday after waiting for 2 hours outside the main venue. The Prime Minister said he was sorry for the confusion. Well, we'll have more from Glasgow later in the programme, but now let's have the day's other news and let's join Sophie.
Hugh, thank you. 2 Metropolitan Police officers have pleaded guilty to taking and sharing photographs of the bodies of 2 sisters who were found stabbed to death in a park in London. PC Dennis Jaffa and PC Jamie Lewis, who'd been assigned to guarding the crime scene, distributed the images of Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman in June last year. Helena Wilkinson has this report from the Old Bailey.
This is one of the last photos of Bieber Henry on the left and Nicole Smallman. Hours after it was taken, they were murdered. Last week, Mina Smallman saw her daughter's killer sentenced for his crimes. Today she was back again at the same court, having to endure yet more unimaginable pain.
It may sound really ridiculous that this case has brought us to even more anxiety today. It's the most nervous I've felt doing any interview, and I think because it was the final straw.
These 2 officers were meant to be guarding the area where her daughter's bodies were found, PC Dennis Jaffa on the left and PC Jamie Lewis. But despite their orders, the 2 officers then breached the crime scene cordon and took photographs of the bodies, which they then shared on WhatsApp. One of the images was then edited by Lewis, who superimposed his own face onto the picture with the victims in the background. Today, they appeared together in the dock. Guilty, they both said, to one count of misconduct in a public office. In a statement, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner Cressida Dick said, "What former PC Jaffa and PC Lewis chose to do that day was utterly unprofessional and deeply insensitive. I know that it is the view of colleagues across the Met who utterly condemn this behaviour." Outside court, the Independent Office for Police Conduct said there was no place in policing for this behaviour and it had to stop.
A culture where some officers don't see anything wrong with sharing deeply offensive messages and where others feel unable or unwilling to challenge has to change, and it has to change now.
The two officers who took and shared pictures of the sisters' bodies will be sentenced next month. The judge told them to expect prison sentences. Helena Wilkinson, BBC News, at the Old Bailey.
More than 20 people have been killed and dozens injured in an attack on Afghanistan's biggest military hospital. 2 explosions were heard at the gate to the hospital in Kabul. No one has admitted carrying out the attack, but the Taliban has blamed Islamic State fighters. The Health Secretary has admitted the government is not on track to meet its pledge to raise the number of GPs in England by 6,000 by 2024. Sajid Javid was facing MPs on a Commons committee which also heard there was a workforce crisis in the NHS. Our health editor Hugh Pym is here, and more evidence of the difficulty not in just retaining staff but also recruiting, training new doctors.
Yes, Sophie, that pledge of 6,000 more GPs in England by 2024 was made by the Conservatives in the 2019 election campaign. Now Sajid Javid is saying it's not on track and more needs to be done to ensure that it is. And of course, back in 2015, the Conservatives pledged 5,000 more GPs in England by 2020, and that was not met. And yes, there were references to the workforce crisis in the NHS at this committee, including by the former Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt, and Mr Javid was pressed on how much money had been set aside for training of new staff after the spending review announcement of more money for the NHS last week, and he said that had not yet been set out. But he did go on to say that there would be a 15-year plan for the training of new doctors and nurses and other health professionals, but that would not be set out until next spring.
Hugh, thank you. While the government's latest coronavirus figures for the UK show there were 33,865 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, which means on average there were 40,068 new cases reported per day in the last week. There were 9,538 people in hospital with COVID as of yesterday, the highest number since the first week of March. 293 deaths were recorded. That's of people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test, but that figure includes some deaths in England that were not reported yesterday. On average, in the past week, 162 related deaths were recorded every day. And more than 8.3 million people have received their booster jab. This includes third doses for those with certain health conditions. Investigators say low adhesion between the track and train wheels was the most likely cause of the crash between 2 trains in Salisbury. The trains collided on the approach to a tunnel near Salisbury Station on Sunday. One of the drivers is believed to have suffered life-changing injuries. Another 4 small energy providers have gone bust, according to the energy watchdog Ofgem. Omni Energy, MA Energy, Zebra Power and Ampower UK have announced they are ceasing to trade. The regulator said it will choose a new supplier for more than 23,000 households and businesses affected. A group of MPs has called for the rollout of so-called smart motorways in England to be halted until the government can prove they're safe. The smart motorway system, which can mean no hard shoulder, is designed to increase capacity, but relatives of those killed when their vehicles broke down say relying on technology instead of a hard shoulder is dangerous. Here's our transport correspondent Caroline Davis.
A sombre procession past Parliament. Each coffin represents a life lost on the country's smart motorways, carried through Westminster yesterday by those who want the system changed. Smart motorways use technology to try to ease traffic. They're controversial when they don't have hard shoulders. If a vehicle breaks down in a live lane and can't reach a refuge bay, a red cross is meant to tell motorists not to drive in that lane. The government has argued technology means drivers are more likely to die on a normal motorway than a smart one. Campaigners say they are less safe. The Transport Select Committee says it wants existing smart motorways to be made safer. It doesn't want any more hard shoulders to be removed or put back.
If you cut the data in a number of different ways, it gives different conclusions. In order to get drivers confident that they feel safe enough to use the smart motorway network, we need to pause, we need to fix some of these issues that have been outstanding for far too long, and then make a much better determination on the rollout of smart motorways.
But work is continuing.
Across the country, motorways like this one are having their hard shoulders turned into an active lane for traffic. The committee might want that work to stop, but there's nothing that requires the government to do that. And some campaigners say that this report doesn't go far enough.
Claire Mercer's husband died on a smart motorway without a hard shoulder in 2019.
Our aim is to just get the hard shoulder back in every single instance. So, and we don't feel that these proposals are strong enough, but I welcome the fact that they say to pause them. They propose pausing smart motorways because that gives me more time to get the legal case in the High Court moving.
The government has said that it could have been faster implementing safety measures, but says it's committed to making smart motorways safer. It says it will respond to the report in due course, but continuing with smart motorways won't be without its obstacles. Caroline Davis, BBC News.
Tottenham have appointed former Chelsea boss Antonio Conte as their new head coach. Conte, who has signed an initial 18-month contract, won the Premier League title with Chelsea in 2017 and most recently led Inter Milan to the Serie A title in May. The announcement comes after Spurs fired manager Nuno Espirito Santo yesterday after just 17 games. Let's go back now to Hugh at the COP26 summit in Glasgow.
Sophie, many thanks. Well, the decisions being made here in Glasgow this week and indeed next week, some 11 days to go, could well have far-reaching effects on people's everyday lives. Cutting carbon emissions will involve people changing their habits and their choice of food, their choice of goods, which will no doubt present some practical challenges. Our science correspondent Victoria Gill has been to meet one family in Leeds who've been looking to the future.
Busy family life makes it difficult to count our carbon emissions. But for this family in Leeds, decarbonising the daily routine has become a priority.
I think he constantly likes to remind me that I need to do better. And
do you think it could be made easier, to make the changes that you'd like to make?
Be better for the environment if we switch to eating more plant-based things, but we don't really do a lot of that at the moment, and we could be better with that.
As a parent, I am busy, but actually I need to just make these changes for the better, really. It's the kind of next generation that will be left with these problems.
And we'll all need to be part of the solution. According to one in-depth study of our energy use, the UK could halve its demand for energy by 2050 without compromising our quality of life.
We've got to reduce emissions so quickly over the next 10 years that it means that everyone needs to be involved in the debate and in positive changes.
Lower emissions, researchers say, means less consumption. As well as cutting our meat intake, most of us could reduce how many calories we eat. Buying less and repairing more could help make a dent in the mountain of electrical waste we produce every year. And researchers are calling for investment in public transport and cycling networks to increase tenfold in the next decade to help us all decarbonise our travel. To work out what that means for their day-to-day, we organised for Edie and Joe to get some expert advice.
I'd never want anyone to feel guilty about their carbon footprint. It's not always easy to make changes. You could consider journeys under a particular distance. A short journey could be done by cycling or walking.
Well, we're definitely up for the challenge, aren't we, Edie? We'll try our very best this week.
Come on, mister. We're just about to walk to the shop. This week, we've been driving less and walking more, also using plant-based alternatives.
Edie, Joe, how'd it go, your challenge?
We've had a good week. We've tried really hard to walk wherever was reasonably practicable, but I don't think we ate as many plant-based alternatives as we could have done.
I think we did fantastically well. Lots of the changes also can lead to a sort of a healthier, more active lifestyle as well. And I think that's what's positive about this.
To slash our emissions as quickly as we need to, scientists say, most of us will need to rethink our daily habits and consume a little bit less. Victoria Gill, BBC News.
Just a sense of some of the potential challenges ahead. Well, today in Glasgow, it's been a lovely sunny day for the most part. Let's get the rest of the weather with Stav now.
Thank you very much, Hugh. Good evening to you. Yes, it has been pretty good across central southern Scotland, some inland parts as well of central and southern England. Coastal areas have seen quite a few showers around. Tonight, some showers will continue around northern, western and eastern coast, but central southern areas are going to turn cold with some frost and some fog patches developing. Now, we've got a run of northerly winds. This weather front will be accentuating the showers across the northern half of Scotland as we move through the course of the evening and overnight. So plenty of showers here, some wintry over the high ground, a few grazing eastern coastal parts, and there'll be plenty into Northern Ireland, down the Irish Sea, affecting west, southwest Wales and in towards Cornwall. So where we have the showers and more of a breeze, and temperatures no lower than 5 or 6 degrees, but central southern parts of the country you can see cold there, the touch of frost and some fog to greet us on Wednesday. We'll still have this weather front accentuating the showers a little bit as it spreads its way southward. So I think again tomorrow most of the showers will be around coastal areas, particularly the northern half of Scotland. Again, some wintriness over the high ground. And this weather front will be enhancing the shower activity across central northern England too. So I think more cloud around here and those showers pushing in a little bit further inland. There'll still be quite a bit of sunshine around. The wind's lighter in the south, quite breezy in the north. That really will take the edge off the temperatures. It is going to be a chilly day wherever you are. Highs of 8 to maybe 11 or just about 12 degrees across the far south. Now, towards the end of the week, we start to see this area of high pressure toppling in from the west. That'll tend to kill off the showers, and it'll also start to introduce some milder air off the Atlantic. You can see the blue hue degrading away into yellows and oranges towards the end of the week. So another chilly day Thursday. From Friday onwards, we start to see a bit more cloud around. It turns milder. It turns wetter and windier across northern areas, tending to stay a little bit drier further south. So some changes ahead for the end of the week. Back to you, Hugh.
Stav, many thanks to you once again. And that's all from BBC News at 6 at the Climate Summit in Glasgow. We will have more on today's developments at COP26 at 10 o'clock tonight. But now on BBC One, we'll join the BBC's news teams where you are. Bye for now.